Hi, everybody. Matt Lawton here. This is the Astrological channel. I'm going to take a look at the astrological weather report for the week of February 2nd to 8th and the month of February. I'll take a look at the outer planet stuff that's going on in February to this month, and I'll actually do that before the weekly. Um, but this week we've got Mercury and Venus still moving together. They're going to sextile Chiron and square Uranus, and Mercury is going to go into Pisces, the sign that it's least comfortable in, for a very extended period of time until April 16th, because it's going to be going retrograde at the end of the month. And then for the monthly, our eclipse season begins. Plus, both this week and this month, Uranus goes direct, which will only leave Jupiter as the only planet retrograde right now. And then later in the month, Saturn will finally go back into Aries and conjunct Neptune one last time. So, a few things to talk about in the monthly, a few things to talk about in the weekly, and together they should make up the blog time here. So, just a little bit of information first. The Astrological Winds channel is a free video blog that I do on YouTube, and I think this is now the 6th or 7th year that it's been on the YouTube. So going for a long time there. And if you have an account on YouTube and you like what you see, I'd really like you to become a follower. And when you do that, don't forget to turn your notifications on so that you know when the blogs are posted. Also, like to remind people it is still available on podcasts, which it was before it was a YouTube channel, the exact same audio copy of what you get on the video. And that frees you up, to do it like, driving to work or walking the dog or whatever. I know our time is valuable these days. Always can find it also on my website, www.astrologicalwinds.com. There's a blog tab on the top corner. And if you hit that, the current blog will be there, probably about 3 months worth of weeklies, some of the older ones from past years on the yearlies. This year's yearly is there. This year's quarterly for the US is there. Also, Instagram. Astrological Winds channel has an Instagram page. So if you want to become a follower of that, you'll see the link come up every week in your newsreel. So just a little bit of that, and I want you all to remember I need you to pass the link along to somebody else. This is a free service that I'm giving. It actually cost me a little money to do the blog, and I just ask people to pay it forward by passing the link along every time they check it out to someone in their contacts. Remember, more than half the world believes in astrology, so you're on the majority side when you're passing that link along. And and check out my website if you need any professional services done. I've been a professional astrologer for 24 years now, so I'd really love to do your chart. I'll get a little bit more into that later. I really want to get into the blog. So I want to do February 1st, before I do um the weekly. And actually, two of the big things in February are Saturn going back into Aries and then conjuncting Neptune right after that later in the month. And I really talked at length about both of those things in the yearly report. All right. And so I really don't want to go back into detail and spend more time on this. What I'd really like you to do is go back to that, because it has a lot to do with the shifts that are going on right now. The Saturn joining Neptune in Aries, and this is their last conjunction. They were conjuncting one another in Pisces last year. But just remember, for Saturn, Aries is a very weak sign. It's the sign of its fall, right? So this is a time where, people who are authorities really can get aggressive in their desire to try to control what's going on underneath them. And a lot of times what that does is it sets up a great fall for them eventually. So just based on that and what we've been having going on in the last few weeks in the United States, I would really expect the current administration in the US to continue to try to use federal agencies, the military, law enforcement, on their own citizens in very heavy-handed ways, just trying to control the dialogue, and this can be violent energy once again. And that immediate conjunction to Neptune on the 15th is going to bring a lot of confusion, a lot of doubt and uncertainty to the world, and everybody trying to, get their ideals into reality, and they're not mixing well together. So, like I said, really refer back to the annual report if you want to really get a lot of detail on those two changes that are at mid-month. The other three shifts I want to talk about, the first one actually happens this week. It happens tomorrow, and that's when Uranus goes direct. Okay. And so like all the other outer planets are direct right now. Jupiter is not. It's, so that's kind of like the only one holding out. And Uranus is going direct in the critical 28th degree of Taurus, and you've been following the blog for a while. 7 years ago when Uranus went into Taurus, I told people, this is just going to be a wild ride economically the next 7 years. It's going to really shake up resources and finances and the markets, and they'll go up and down, and things will seem really reliable, unstable, a lot of jumping around, different things being valuable, and then other things taking over, giving a lot of false readings too on, like, the economy of what's happening that's being reported versus what's actually happening out on the street. So to me, with this Uranus going direct on the last critical 2 degrees of Taurus, I would really expect a lot of more economic shock for the next couple months at least. A lot of unreliability, a lot of, there's a lot of things in the market right now that are showing the United States dollar is getting very weak. Inflation is strong. It's, every time we go to the store every week, it seems like the prices have gone up on everything again. So I really don't think this energy is going to shift this critical degree thing. And I don't really think we learned our lesson either about, trying to deal with resources while Uranus was going through there. So that I think it's going to be a lot of unreliability still going on. And then on April 26th is when Uranus will actually finally leave Taurus and go into Gemini for good for 7 years. And once again, that is a really important part of 2026 that I talked about at length in the annual report. A big, big year for 2026. I've been talking about it probably for 7 years, how this was going to be such a big year with all these outer planets changing. So, really need to go back to that. But on a personal level, Uranus going direct is a much more subtle shift, right? But I find it very interesting. Astrology and its timing just blows me away every day, really. Every day, really, it does. And this is one of those ones where when you think about Uranus being the planet of rebellion, right? The planet of cutting edge, alternative viewpoints, new ideas, freedom seeking, honoring the individual, honoring independence. Actually, a lot about what America, the United States, was initially founded upon, a lot of very Uranian ideas, which incidentally, Uranus is the planet that is most like the sign of Aquarius, which is the age we're going into. You know, so what I think is really interesting right now at this point in U.S. history, as we watch it unfold in front of us right now, there is this great stirring up that's started now in the last couple of weeks that's coming out of Minnesota, really, because of the heavy-handed tactics going on there and the public actually fighting back and not backing down in what is actually peaceful protests, a very alternative but rebellious way. And so here it is affecting individuals. They're ready. They've been brought to a point where the changes are so shocking going on around them that they are willing to go out there with their bodies and want in seeking their freedom and their independence and their rebelliousness at this case against what they're seeing as the current administration's policies going way over what they were supposed to be. This was supposed to be taking out the criminals, not taking out 5-year-old kids, not taking out peaceful protesters, not taking out American civilians who are supposed to be here. So somehow the message, got really upsetting Uranus energy, and now it's going direct, and you can see people as individuals are standing up, and they're not going to be like, so they're going to, they're going to want to stand up for their freedom now. So very interesting on the timing of that. And I also think it's really interesting that eclipse season is starting right now too, when we're in the middle of this very sensitive time in the world. On February 17th, right? That the day? Let me just double check this for you guys. Yeah, February 17th, right? We have a new moon at the 29th degree of Aquarius. That critical degree right at the edge of Aquarius. Things are happening, right? Things are moving, right? And that's going to be an eclipse too. That's going to be our first solar eclipse of the year, the first one of there's 2 eclipse seasons every year. So this one is with the sun is getting really close to the north node in Pisces. So that's what we're going to get is a solar eclipse. And eclipses are turning points, you guys. Eclipses are like flashpoints where some event occurs either in our personal lives or in the world, countries, or in different groups of people where life changes forever. It's like going on a straight line and all of a sudden making a right or left and going in a new direction. So the fact that this eclipse season is starting in this very delicate time, I think we're going to see some really, really like shocking kind of events continue and change the course of a lot of people's lives, possibly groups, possibly countries. The second eclipse of the season isn't until March. It's on March 3rd. It's a lunar eclipse when the full moon is at 13 degrees of Virgo. So I will get into much more detail about these 2 eclipses on the weeklies of those full moons and new moons. But it's pretty interesting to know that eclipses can definitely change the destiny of us very, very quickly in these quickly changing times. And then the one other thing I wanted to mention for February is Mercury is going retrograde on the 26th of February. And then so it'll be retrograde for, half of March, basically, and then we'll go direct again, and then eventually not, and it'll stay in Pisces all the way until April 16th, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about in the weekly in a minute. So that's the bigger stuff going on for the month of February. I think, obviously it's already very fitting, most of this energy that I just discussed. We can see it really playing out. And, you're going to see it probably play out, for some of us in our real lives, in our personal lives too, is a good way to say it. So the week of the 2nd to the 8th, this week, if you remember last week, Mercury and Venus were conjunct, right? And so they were like really, especially Wednesday through Saturday, a lot of relationship activity. Probably they both quincunx Jupiter at the same time, and so now Mercury is starting. As Mercury is moving ahead of Venus this week. It's still moving a little bit faster than Venus, although it will start to slow down soon as it gets near the end of the month towards that retrograde. It's going to start slowing down. And then by Friday, Mercury is going to go into Pisces. So just like I said, they were traveling together. So they're both going to sextile Chiron early in the week, and they're both going to square Uranus later in the week. So they're kind of like, and Mercury's a little bit ahead of the other. And that's today, Monday. Mercury is sextiling Chiron on Monday. And is, these are both good aspects. These are the Mercury to the and Venus to the Chiron with sextiles. This one really opens up our mind, actually, and gets us to be more tolerant and open to finding new solutions to things that are hurting us, that are wounding us, like recognizing that that doing this over and over and over again is something that hurts us. So then, like, this gives us the opportunity to see it from a different way, is a good way to say it. And that gives us the ability, therefore, to use our words to create different healing forms. The mind is very sharp when Mercury is sextile Chiron. It's very intuitive and it's full of new ideas, very original ideas that are new solutions that can cut right to the heart of matters. So, and the other thing about Mercury Chiron, because Mercury is the planet of communications, this is one of the ones where it can enhance other levels of communication besides linear too. So, like I said, it's a strong intuitional energy. So trust nonverbal forms of communications to give us some of these insights that can give us some of these new solutions that we can maybe start cleaning up some things that have been hurting us. So good for clear logical thinking, and creating forms out of the information that we get. And also gives us a very witty mind. I mean, Mercury is witty as itself, but with Chiron's wisdom, together they can be like, that wit that's kind of like, sees the cynicalism and the sarcasm and can be like humorous even about it. And then Tuesday is the day that Uranus goes direct. And I just talked about that. 28 degrees of Taurus will go into Gemini on April 26th for 7 years, will not go into Cancer until August of 2032. So, like I said, please check out the annual report. I talk about what those 7 years of Uranus and Gemini are going to mean. A lot of exciting things for technology, but also a lot of danger with, like, not having not having the emotional awareness of what that technology is bringing. So look at the annual report for that. Then Wednesday is the day when Venus will sextile Chiron, okay? And so just like Monday with Mercury, Venus gets there. And this, when Venus sextiles Chiron, it brings out a very caring and loving side of us. Usually people are it really adjust their attitudes towards one another really well, and they can work well together. They can find like beauty in their relationships. They can find value that can be very personal to us and therefore very healing. Once again, Chiron always bringing in that healing. And this is, something where, sometimes through hard times, relationships are something that can be really helpful for us. Just having that energy of someone around to hear you, and vice versa, it can be a very healing thing. This can also bring healing through artistic creativity or even just exposure to art. That can move our consciousness somehow, that can inspire us somehow, and we find something valuable out of it. But it's the same thing with our relationships too. I mean, we're very, very sensitive to others with this energy being a sextile Chiron, and we want to bring in love. We want to bring in harmony into our relationships. We can touch each other very deeply, and have like a synergy of opening up that can come together for each other with that energy. So very, very supportive energy at the beginning of, from Monday through Wednesday into Thursday with Mercury and Venus and Chiron. Okay. And then Thursday is the day that Mercury will square Uranus, like I said, moving ahead. And, Mercury and Uranus are two octaves of the mind, right? The Mercury is the intellect, and, what I call the lower octave, and Uranus is the intuitive mind. the creative mind, what I call, the higher octave of the mind. So whenever they get together with an aspect, it builds a bridge. It can help balance, or well, maybe not balance in this case because it's a square, but it can help connect the two hemispheres of the brain, where the left and in the right brain we have Mercury working, and in the left brain we have Uranus working. And sometimes you know they're not really communicating well. Well, when they aspect one another, a bridge is built between the intuition and the intellect, and we can really get some serious downloads. Now with a square, it's a little problematic, because what's going on with the square is there's so much information coming in intuitionally from all these different sources. It's like we have this really like acute mind, and we're picking stuff up here, what someone said, a sign over here, something that popped on our phone, something over there, it's like boom, 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 and we're getting all these intuitive downloads from them, right? And there's so many of them coming in, like it's high speed internet, into our brain, into the lower mind, into the intellect, that it can't sort them out. Right. So what the Mercury square Uranus does is it gets us very scattered. It's like that old police song, "Too much information," if you remember that. I'm showing my age here. But anyway, it's really hard to sort it all out. And here's the thing, right? There's some unbelievably ingenious ideas in that stuff. And you got to try to figure out what's going to stick and what's not. A lot of them are probably just half thought out, half baked ideas, and they probably aren't going to stick, right? But we got to somehow figure out, if you want to get some value out of them, which ones are. And it's not an easy thing to do, because when we're getting that much stimulation to the mind, what happens? It starts jacking up the nervous system, right? And what happens to us? We get edgy, we get scattered, we get sloppy, we get careless, we get impulsive with our decision making. So that basically the overstimulation really gets us in this edgy, scattered way, and it makes it really hard to focus, really hard to concentrate. We can open our mouths and insert our foot really easily. We can make decisions that we regret really quickly, so be careful about this. We can even get ourselves into accidents, and so the thing is too, like, what we really need with this is some discipline. We need to like be able to slow the mind down somehow. Be careful, try to slow things down. And it's not going to be easy, because what makes it even more difficult is Uranus being stationary right now. That means it's extra strong in those critical degrees. It's really trying to download us some really important information right now, but there's an awful lot. Like, can you find the signal through the noise, is a good way to say it, with this energy. So just I really think, it can be a really exciting kind of energy, and really stimulating and keep us very positive, but we can miss a lot of things and we can get really sloppy. Now, what's interesting on that day too, I don't have it on the board, I just saw this, remembered this. The sun is quincunx Jupiter on Thursday also. And I think, with this one, it's interesting because I think this could play in with the Mercury and Uranus, in the sense that, the downloads that you're getting are getting you really excited, and that you can sense, hey, there may be some positive changes coming round the bend, But, one of the big issues when you bring the sun and Jupiter into this too is, are you willing to do the work that needs to be done to bring in those changes? And, with the Mercury Uranus, that is disciplining yourself and really, figuring out what is valuable. You got to be really careful with the Sun Jupiter, because it can puff us up. It can get us arrogant and self righteous, and combined with the rebellious energy of Uranus, we might not actually get very much done. We might like just blow a lot of hot air out, blow our horns a lot and not really do a lot. So if you want to get anything done, these two energies require a lot of discipline, and the two of them working together are going to be really difficult to hold down and do that. We may, even in our best efforts, we may find ourselves like just spinning out on Thursday, maybe even into Friday. But, if you can try to maintain some discipline, this can be really positive. And once again, what does Sun Jupiter quincunx do? Something very similar to Mercury Chiron. It can give different viewpoints of things where you can find answers to things that you didn't see it from that angle before. One of the other things that's really cool and could work really well on this one, if you can stay on that, that tight wire of that energy Thursday, Friday, these ones can work really well in knowing in the moment what needs to be done on something. Like when something comes up, that's some solution that freezes people, like boom, I know what to do, and you do it, and you almost like people look at you like wow, like how did that just happen? Okay, so really interesting energy. It's going to be really hard to discipline, though. I'm not, going to kid you guys about that. And then Friday is the day that Mercury goes into Pisces, and it will go retrograde on the 26th in Pisces at 23 degrees. So therefore, the whole retrograde is going to be in Pisces. I think it goes back to 8 degrees of Pisces. And then on April 16th, it will turn direct. Or no, on April 16th, it will finally get out of Pisces. So this is the sign that Mercury traditionally is weakest in. It's not only the sign of its detriment, but it's also the sign of its fall. And well, I just said to you guys what Mercury's about, the lower mind, right? Well, Pisces is probably the sign that has the least to do with the intellect. It does not operate out of the intellect at all. So it's a very emotional sign. Pisces is all about feeling our way through things. Whereas Mercury is this completely non emotional planet that wants to think its way through things. So that's why it's so weak there. And so the normal mind, the intellectual mind, is not going to operate very well while Mercury is in Pisces. And that will be squared or exponentiated during the retrograde period. I think what's going to happen during this retrograde, and I'll get into it at the end of the month, is people are going to be walking around like in a fog, like not sure what to do. Seriously, okay? But I'll get into that at the last blog of the month on the last weekly, and we'll get into that deeply. But I think it's going to really confuse people, this Mercury retrograde. And Mercury in Pisces just normally has a really hard time just dealing with the real world. It lives in a world in the mind of fantasy, of dreams, of imagination, inspiration, and it definitely just goes away from things that are intellectual and logical. It's really a left-brained kind of energy, and so it's really one of the things that's really good for Mercury and Pisces is creative writing. Actually, any kind of like poetry, lyrical writing, music writing, non-linear forms of communication too are really good for Mercury. Like, literally like, telepathic kind of energy, sensing what others are feeling or seeing, but it does interfere with our communication and thinking skills as far as like clarity and acuteness. And also, Mercury in Pisces is very subjective in the way it looks at things too. So that's another reason why it can be very difficult to connect with others like in a solid way. It can feel like the energy is like, soft, wonky, like uncommitted energy. It's very difficult to make decisions with Mercury and Pisces too, because we swing back and forth. Our emotions are motoring our decisions. And so, like, we may be feeling one way in 1 hour, a couple hours later, feeling another way. So, we can get very indecisive with Mercury and Pisces with our decision making just because of our emotions. And we don't know how quickly our emotions change. The moon changes like aspects every couple hours, and I watch people's emotions just change completely based on those aspects every day. So it's very something that quickly changes within us. And yes, when it affects the way we think and communicate, especially in Pisces, with Mercury and Pisces. We're not that interested in the logic in that. And the other thing about Mercury and Pisces too, we can be very easily influenced by other people and their ideas. This can be like the perfect follower, like drink the Kool-Aid. No, don't do it. So just you got to be careful about being a blind faith follower in Mercury and Pisces, and once again, just going on a feeling, and you can get swept up by like the feeling of a group going along and not put any logic into your decision making. So it's going to be a wonky next couple months, guys, with Mercury in the next 10 weeks, really, of Mercury in Pisces and retrograde is going to make it even wonkier for our minds to try to sort out what the heck is going on around us. And then Sunday is the day that Venus squares Uranus. So this one, it really affects relationships, especially the ones that are close to you. This is one of those ones where you can get fed up with the people who are close to you and the habits that they have that they never can seem to break, and always bring some kind of upsetting event or something. So this is one of those ones where you kind of get sick of the patterns of your loved ones and you want to break free of them. You're like, you know what? I really, I need a break. I mean, it can go to outright rebellion. If you've been a parent, that's like if you have a teenager, it can be that kind of energy of just like, I don't want to have anything to do with you. The good thing about Venus Uranus square, though, is it does blow things out in the open so that you're clear about where everybody's at. And then each individual can decide from there, is this something I can work with? Can I, take this and still work with you? And if you cannot, it definitely can break, relationships up too, or you can, cause a separation, that's like, boom, I really need to do this. One of the things Venus Uranus too, it's not like we don't want relationships. We want something new. We want something that's stimulating, something that's exciting. So finding new people to hang out with, or even having new experiences with your old, if you have relationships that feel stale, like doing something different can bring something up. But like I said, it's not like we don't want them. In fact, Venus Uranus can be very flirtatious, and a lot of times is just looking for that short term kind of connection with someone, or trying to connect with someone that's very alternative or different than you, and then that can end up actually being a long-term relationship with, or even an alternative way of having a relationship. So it does favor things like that. But definitely a day next Sunday we're doing something different, having some kind of new experience, exposing yourself to some new kind of art, or creating some new kind of art that you literally can shift your consciousness. And this is also a day and a weekend. Be careful with your money. We can be really impulsive with our money making decisions with Venus Uranus. So and make some poor decisions. So just, be careful that you're not, just on the dime, blowing your budget out or something, by just wow, not paying attention and being impulsive about this decision. So that's what I got for this week, folks. Next week we do. Let's see, what are we going to have happen next week? Next week, okay, Venus is going to obviously right behind Mercury. It's going to follow Mercury into Pisces. Venus loves Pisces, though. Unlike Mercury, Venus loves Pisces. So that is going to be a nice one. And that is the week. Next week is the week that Saturn will go into Aries for the next 2.5 years. And then the sun, which is behind Mercury and Venus now, is going to do these same aspects next week that Mercury and Venus did this week. That is sextile Chiron and square Uranus. So that's what I'll be looking at next week. This is Matt Lutton. This is the Astrological Channel. You're going to pass the link along right now to somebody else. If you'd like to give me a currency donation, no amount is too small, like, even $5 or whatever. Cash App, $ Matthew with two T's, Lawton, Lauten, capital L, Venmo at Matthew, two T's, hyphen in the middle, Lawton, Lauten. Like I said, no amount is too small. However, the best way to support me is when you need that reading by a professional astrologer, not when you're trying to figure it out in a book or getting a computer printout, or have a friend that's like, reading out of a book for you. If you really want the true holistic experience, I mean, your chart never leaves you. How much money do you spend on all these other things that you do? So, invest in yourself and get your chart done. And I really recommend every year around your birthday to get a yearly reading. But I also do relationship charts, children's charts, soul purpose charts, different questions, elections for the best timing of things, relocation type work. And if you have a group, I can do lectures, classes, workshops, mini readings for your events. Even can be done like, electronically these days. And if you are a student, I do have some beginner classes available on podcasts. If we can get 4 students for intermediate or beginner classes, I'm always willing to do that live too, but I need that commitment for that. All right, you guys, that's what I got for this week. Thanks so much for tuning in again. I will see you all next week, and we'll talk about that Venus going into Pisces. Until then, we've got this great energy to work with at the beginning of this week, but get ready for that Mercury in Pisces, because I think there's going to be a lot of confusion in our world and in our minds for the next 10 weeks on where we're going and what we should do about it. All right, I'll see y'all next week.